Well, welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to the 7th talk in our International Philosophy Talk series held by the Department of Philosophy at Marmara University here in Istanbul, Turkey. Today we are honored to have Professor Barbara Montero with us. Barbara Gail Montero is a professor of philosophy at the College of Staten Island and Graduate Center of the City University of New York. And I believe starting fall 2022, she will be at the University of Notre Dame. She specializes in philosophy of mind, metaphysics, cognitive science, physicalism, expertise, consciousness, proprioception in particular, also in aesthetics and utilitarianism in infinite worlds. Her research considers two different notions of body as the physical or material substance of the world, and body as the moving, breathing, flesh and blood instrument that we use when we run, walk, dance, and play. Among various publications, I'm just going to mention some of her books. She is the author of Thought in Action, Expertise and the Conscious Mind, published by the Oxford University Press in 2016. Very Short Introduction, Philosophy of Mind, again published by Oxford University Press very recently, 2022, I believe. And she's also a co-author of Continuous Improvement, Intertwining Mind and Body in Athletic Expertise, again published by Oxford University Press very recently, 2021. Her talk today is entitled Mathematical Truth and the Causal Relevance of Abstract Entities. So please join me in welcoming Professor Barbara Montero. And thank you again for participating in our Philosophy Talk series.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. And let's see, I'm admitting people here. Oh, well, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to, but I get the request. Okay, so what I'd like to do is have you interrupt as I go along. So if you have questions, please just, you can either unmute and try to capture the attention or drop a question into a chat and I'll stop and hopefully I'll notice it or else someone else can interrupt and let me know. Okay, so because this is of all this like the sort of wide variety of areas of research that I work on, this is yet another one, but I've become interested in some of the ontological questions of mathematics, and really I was interested in this a long time ago, actually, when I was a graduate student and heard Paul Benasraf give a talk, and I sort of had an inkling of the idea that I'm developing now. So it sometimes takes a while to really get to things, but this is something I've wanted to write on for a long time, and I'll try to explain it to you, and I'm looking forward to your feedback. Okay, so there's a question, and sorry I don't have a nicely worked out PowerPoint. I do have COVID right now, not such a bad case, but it has sort of knocked me out a bit. What makes okay, so there's this question, you know, the axioms of mathematics, we take them as true. Well, what makes them true? And how can we know that they are true? So Gödel claims famously claims that he seems to have something like a perception of abstract mathematical objects, of this realm in which the axioms are true. So and the Platonist, this is the Platonist's view, the mathematical Platonist holds that what makes the axioms of mathematics is true is the way this abstract mind-independent realm is. And this is sort of the idea behind, I think, a view that's common among mathematicians, that mathematics is not invented but discovered. So it's sort of in some way, they feel as if they have some insight into an abstract realm of numbers, of mathematical objects. Okay, so, but then a question arises, well, how could we ever have knowledge of this realm? And this is the starting point of a challenge to mathematical Platonism, considered the sort of the central challenge these days, it seems to me, and by the philosopher Paul Ben-Asraf. And here is what he says. The causal isolation of the Platonic realm creates an unbridgeable, quote, chasm between the entities that form the subject matter of mathematics and the human knower. Thus, with respect to mathematical truth, the Platonist casts a shroud of mystery over how knowledge can be obtained at all. So there seems to be this problem, if Platonism is true, if there is an abstract realm, mind independent, that grounds the truth, that serves as the truth conditions for mathematical statements, then how could, it seems that we couldn't ever know, we could never have knowledge of this realm. So as Hartree-Field puts the Ben-Asraf challenge, so I should say, Ben-Asraf himself, I mean, how much, you know, you want to get into the weeds in this debate in philosophy of math, but he himself doesn't think that this is necessarily a reason to reject Platonism, because he thinks there are points in its favor. It allows for uniform semantic analysis of statements. So, but he thinks it's definitely a worry. But others go a little bit further. Hartree-Field, for example, seems to think that it gives us reason to reject Platonism. Field says, quote, if it appears in principle impossible to explain how our beliefs about abstract mathematical entities can so well reflect the facts about them, then that tends to undermine the belief in abstract mathematical entities, despite whatever reason we might have for believing in them. So, I mean, the way he puts it is a little, that tends to undermine. I mean, I guess I take it that he thinks it, for him, it undermines the belief. Okay. So I'm going to argue, however, that Platonism doesn't make it apparently impossible to know, or as Hartree frames the debate, to have reliable belief about the mathematical realm. Since I think on a closer analysis of what the causal relation that needs to hold in order for us to have either knowledge or reliable beliefs about mathematical truths, on a closer analysis of what that needs to be, it doesn't seem impossible for abstracta to be causally relevant to our coming to know mathematical truth. I mean, this isn't to say that I'm not going to argue that abstracta are, but I'm just taking away this in principle impossibility idea, because that's what Hartree, Hartree thinks, well, it's in principle impossible. It seems in principle impossible for abstracta to be causally relevant to our spatiotemporal cognitive faculties. Well, want to say I don't think so. I mean, maybe there's another reason to think that they are, but that still needs to be made out. So, and part of my argument is going to turn on the idea that this idea of in principle impossibility for understanding how abstraction could be causally relevant to our spatiotemporal cognitive faculties is a relic of an outmoded theory of causation. So what Noam Chomsky calls contact mechanics, a theory according to which one thing can causally affect another only on contact. We no longer accept that theory. So it makes it, so something else needs to be said, at least to show this in principle impossibility. And also I'm going to try to illustrate that although some contemporary theories of causation do exclude causal relations between abstract and concrete entities, others allow for such relations. And while the mere fact that there are philosophical theories out there that allow for such relations doesn't substantiate the view that that it's possible, it, I think, takes away this, I think it defeats the argument that it's in principle impossible, or it should at least make us question the in principle impossibility of such concepts. So, okay, so, right, I'm not establishing that it is possible, or a fortiori establishing that that causation between abstract and concrete things does occur. Nonetheless, I think what I'm doing, what I hope to do in this paper is to sort of shift the burden of proof away from the Platonist to the anti-Platonist who thinks that Platonism is impossible because of some causal problem. Now, there might be other reasons to reject Platonism, but here I'm just going to be assuming that on balance, that there are good reasons to accept Platonism. However, that the Achilles heel is this Banasraf challenge. So, and that I'm going to challenge. Okay, so if this is correct, then Banasraf, if what I'm going to argue is correct, then Banasraf's challenge, the challenge which in Field's reinterpreted form, Austin Lenabo identifies as probably the most influential objection to Platonism, misses its mark. Okay, so I think this most influential objection isn't really a problem for the Platonists. They don't need to respond to it. Okay, questions so far. That's just sort of setting up sort of the introduction. Any questions? Just, I'll move on. Might not be so clear, but okay. There we go. Okay. So let's go over the challenge. Okay, the challenge. Banasraf argues that Platonism, so Platonism seems unable to account for our knowledge of mathematical truth. Since he says that he's not going to state this in a precise way, but we all have the idea, since something like this, since knowledge, that he requires some type of causal connection, either direct or indirect, but somewhere down the line, some sort of causal connection to obtain between the knower and the truth conditions for P. So if I know that there's an apple on the table, then either this apple and its arrangement on the table is having some sort of causal impact on my perceptual system, or the apple caused a shadow, which I see, or the apple had a causal impact on my daughter's perceptual system and she Tell me about it, something like that. So the causation plays a role in the story. So like that view, he says. Okay, now it's widely thought that Vanasaraf himself doesn't praise his objection to Platonism in the optimal way because he's relying on some type of causal theory of knowledge, which people say is problematic. And this has inspired Field primarily, and most everyone follows him, to reformulate the argument so that it doesn't depend on a causal theory of knowledge. I'm also going to reformulate it, but for reasons quite distinct from Field's. Okay, so Field aims to formulate the challenge so that it is not beholden to, quote, any theory of knowledge in the sense in which the causal theory is a theory of knowledge. That is, it does not depend on any assumption about necessary and sufficient conditions for knowledge. Okay, but strictly speaking, so I'm fairly new in philosophy of math, but this sort of surprised me to read this because as Vanasaraf presents it, his argument does not rest on a theory of knowledge in Field's sense, since it depends on assumption only about a necessary condition for knowledge, not on a necessary and sufficient condition. Okay, so what his argument depends on is what he says is more like that the truth conditions for your knowledge claim are causally relevant to your coming to have this knowledge. Okay, so that's one point. But of course, even as a mere necessary condition, a causal requirement, a general causal requirement on knowledge in general is questionable. Because, for example, arguably, we know that the sun is going to rise tomorrow. And that the sun, or more metaphorically, and we don't know, I guess that the sun will come out tomorrow, as Annie says, but okay, that the sun is going to rise tomorrow. But that there's no way for anyone to have had any causal connection to tomorrow's sun, because tomorrow's sunrise hasn't occurred. So, okay, so that's supposed to be a problem. Okay, however, I'm skipping a lot on my notes here. However, the type of knowledge in question that Goldman is concerned with is only empirical knowledge. And Vanasaraf, in thinking about Platonism, is following Gödel and arguably many Platonists, and is thinking that the perception of the abstract mathematical realm is perceptual or somewhat quasi-perceptual. And the requirement that the truth conditions for one's knowledge are causally relevant to one's knowledge is highly plausible for perceptual knowledge, since perception quite generally seems to entail that what is perceived plays a causal role in the perception. So the difference between perceiving an apple on the table and hallucinating an apple is, well, among other things, is that in the perceptual case, the apple is causing my perceptual experience. So my experience as of an apple, in the perceptual case, it's being caused by the apple. Okay, so okay. However, seems to me, although this argument against Platonism is usually thought of as the epistemic argument, it seems once the idea, once we accept the view that the Platonism in question is which we have a perceptual or perception-like experience of abstract entities, then the role of knowledge in the argument drops out entirely. It's because it just is, the problem occurs already with the claim that the Platonist has a perceptual experience of the abstract realm. So, so I'm just going, one can, if one likes, say, talk about the argument in terms of perceptual knowledge, but I'm just going to drop the knowledge part because it all turns on the perception. Okay.
Sorry,
yeah.
I'm very sorry. Could you just repeat the very last thing that you said? Because as you were moving towards the periphery of the screen, the voice, I got lost. It was fine so far, but yeah. Could you just the very last bit?
Yeah, sorry, I forget. Something is wrong with this. I need a new computer, I guess. I can't get my sound to come unless I'm directly in front of my computer. Okay, and I tend to.
Yeah.
Okay, so here I am. Yes, okay, so this challenge to Platonism, what's typically thought of as the central challenge to Platonism, is usually always formulated in terms of knowledge. That we cannot, that the Platonists cannot explain how we come to have knowledge of mathematical truth. Okay, but it seems to me that the knowledge, well, okay, so field, though, not always, I'm sorry, that Banasraf, okay, explained it in terms of knowledge. Field reformulates it in terms of reliable belief, still an epistemic notion, but I think it can, the argument can be reformulated so it just turns on perception. If it's perceptual knowledge in question, the causal element comes in because it's perception. So one doesn't need to formulate the argument in terms of knowledge. One can just formulate it in terms of the mathematician's perception of the abstract realm. If you like, you can talk about perceptual knowledge, but I'm just going to talk about the mathematician's perception of the abstract realm and formulate the Banasraf objection as presenting up a problem with that idea, that the mathematician perceives an abstract mathematical realm. Okay, so this is the challenge as I'll understand it. Premise one, the perceptual premise. To perceive P requires that P is causally relevant to the perceptual experience of P. Like to perceive the apple requires that the apple is in some way causally relevant to my perception of it, or else it would be hallucination. Two, it seems in principle impossible for abstract objects to be causally relevant to anything spatiotemporally extended. Okay, that's the metaphysical premise. If Platonism is true, we perceive abstract mathematical entities. I'm just taking this as definitional of Platonism. There are some Platonists that wouldn't accept that, but of course, there's going to be some differences in any view. Therefore, it is unreasonable to accept Platonism. Okay, so that's the argument. Questions on what I'm taking to be, the essence of the Banasraf objection, as it's discussed in various forms, various interpretations in the literature on philosophy of mathematics. Any questions? Okay, yeah, Helen.
Yeah, just It might not be relevant at this point, so I'll just throw it out. If it's irrelevant, you can just ignore it. But for the first premise, do we require an awareness by the subject of the causal relevance?
Oh, interesting. I don't think so. I mean, that might occur also, but I think I think the argument works with the weaker claim, just that there is a causal relevance. Aaron, I think. I mean, you maybe see it. You see a.
Well, not at the moment. I'm just.
Okay. We'll see. Okay, let's see. I think the one that's needed is the weaker claim. But Aaron, yeah, do you have a question?
I've been trying to relate your comments about what is and isn't possible to the processes by which children typically learn about numbers and their properties. And it's quite clear that perception, and in some cases contact, others just visual perception, manipulation, plays a very deep role in their grasp of the concepts, the mathematical concepts. And I wonder if that is consistent with what you were just saying. And it seems to me also that the mathematical discoveries about abstract relationships also can come out of such interactions. For example, a child playing with things may discover that if you put two odd numbers together, then you'll always get an even number in the total if the odd numbers are represented by disjoint collections of objects. And then might think about why that happened and gain an insight into how it wouldn't make any difference if different odd numbers were chosen. You'd still always get an even number, although that's a non-trivial. I mean, a 5-year-old probably couldn't think about that, but a 10-year-old might. So I'm wondering to what extent your comment about mathematics being disconnected from perception and physical objects that we can manipulate and so on have missed out on some of the facts about mathematical knowledge.
Yeah, well, I think that that what you're presenting is an argument someone might wield to say we don't need I think this is how Penelope Maddie has gone. We don't need the abstract realm to make to have mathematical discoveries. So we can get it in this spatiotemporal realm of counting apples and whatnot. I think that is an argument one can make against Platonism. So now that would be a different argument. So I'm just going to say that as far as this argument that Banasraf's presenting, it doesn't defeat Platonism, but there might be other arguments against it. And now, I mean, some people will say you can go to a certain degree, you can get with the physical world, but how would we ever get the concept of infinity? Well, maybe you get the concept of potential infinity still, or yes, go ahead.
I didn't mean to imply that we don't need the abstract metaphysical realm. I just meant it can be accessed cognitively through concrete things that in various ways represent those abstract things. And I speak as someone who's spent a lot of time learning mathematics, making my own private, low-level mathematical discoveries and so on, and reflecting on what I was doing. And it just seems to me that in many cases, concrete things in the world play an important role. There are cases that are more complicated, where you think about curves on the surface of a torus. And I mean, we could talk about that later in more detail if we want to, but there are all sorts of unobvious things. But if you produce a few examples and then think about what happens if you generalize those examples, either using a physical torus with line or an imaginatively perceived physical torus,
Yeah.
then it seems to me that that does what you're saying is impossible. But maybe you're not saying it's impossible, and I've misunderstood.
Yeah, I'm not going to say it's impossible. Maybe that is how we do come to have mathematical knowledge. What I'm saying is that the Platonist, or one type of Platonist, will say that, well, we have direct insight into the abstract realm. So it's not, we also have at least direct insight into the mathematical realm. I'm not defending Platonism in general, but just against this one argument that Platonism can't be true because this abstract realm could never have a causal effect on us. So whether there's other reasons to reject the idea that we have direct insight into this abstract realm, well, because maybe we can have all we need is, I'm not sure if this is exactly what you're saying, but we can just abstract from our knowledge of the concrete world to get these ideas about the abstract realm. You don't need to have any sort of perceptual insight into it. Whether, if that can account for everything, then maybe that's a better way. So that would be, that's as far as what I'm saying, that would be fine. Does that address what you said?
If I've understood you, I think it's accepts the point I'm making.
Okay, we can continue later, but good. Yeah, no, that's definitely a good point. Anything else? Anyone else so far? Okay, so hopefully I think that helped to clarify my dialectic, because it's sort of, it's not entirely straightforward. I'm not defending Platonism, but just trying to show why one of the argument that's supposed to be in the philosophy of math, I think is supposed to be the strongest argument to reject Platonism. And for some, like Field, he thinks weighing all the other reasons to accept Platonism on balance should lead us to reject this argument. I think it's not actually that good of an argument because it turns on the idea, on this metaphysical premise. It turns on the idea that it's in principle impossible to see how the abstract realm could have any causal effect on the spatiotemporal realm. And I don't think that premise can be, it's so easy to, actually, it's like obviously true, I can put it that way. Okay. So in terms of this argument, I think you accept the premises, the conclusion is plausible. It's not a deductive argument, but I think it's a reasonable conclusion to draw if you accept the premises. And as I suggested, the perceptual premise is difficult to deny. It's usually thought that perception is a causal concept. It involves causation. Not to say people haven't denied it, because there are people who don't believe in causation. So nonetheless, I think the challenge, as I said, still has the weak link, the metaphysical premise. Okay. Well, this premise, the idea that we can't be causally connected to an abstract realm, is rarely questioned. And in part because some see it as definitional. So Gideon Rosen, in his Stanford Encyclopedia article on abstracta, he does say there is no standard account of how to define abstracta. However, he also comments that if any account deserved to be called the standard account, it is one that asserts that an object is abstract if and only if it is non-spatial and causally inefficacious. So that's just anything. Sometimes just see that as in discussions of this debate, by definition, abstract realm is causally inefficacious. Okay, well then the premise is true. So, but I don't think then the metaphysical premise that says that we can't be causally related to abstracta is true by definition. However, I don't think Platonists need to define their view in terms of a causal not all Platonists do. Yeah, okay. For example, although I'm not keeping an eye on the time at all, of course. How much time do I have, by the way? I didn't even ask. How much time do I have for this talk?
Yeah, no, since we are doing this in an interactive manner,
Yeah.
It's actually fine. I mean, usually we have 45 minutes, 1 hour. It's really flexible. It's
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well,
we're interacting in between. It's
okay.
supposed to be longer.
Yeah, it might go longer. Okay, so Plato's view, also referred to as Platonism with a capital P, is not the same thing as mathematical Platonism, because it has many more implications. But Plato also is arguably a mathematical Platonist. He thinks that there's an abstract realm, mind independent of mathematical. Okay. But Plato thought that what he calls the forms, this mind independent abstract essences of all things, not just numbers, but forms, are the causes of everything in the world. Okay. For example, thinking beautiful or tall. So Plato thought that there were problems. I'm just thinking ahead, because yes, in the Parmenides, some objections are brought up into this, but Plato himself maintains that the forms are causes. So it doesn't have to be defined as, the abstract entities don't need to be defined as acausal entities. And I'm not going to take them to be, and I suggest that the Platonists need not either. And Gödel, as he's talking about his experience of mathematical truth, seems to put it in causal terms. The truth of math, that axioms force themselves upon him, I think is how he puts it. Okay, so if it's not definitional, then the champions of the Benacerraf challenge to Platonism need something to say about what it is about the world that makes it inhospitable to interactions between abstract and concrete. And Benacerraf does have something to say. What does he say? So right here. So he says that abstracta are barred from causal commerce, not because this follows by definition, but because numbers lack spatiotemporal location. If the truth conditions of a mathematical proposition involve abstracta, he tells us, then our four-dimensional space-time worms would not make the necessary causal contact with the grounds of the truth of the proposition. Or in Zoltan Szabó's words, as he puts Benacerraf's position, since abstract entities lack spatiotemporal location, they cannot have any sort of causal impact on us. Gerald Katz, who defends Platonism, but not of the sort of perceptual variety, deems it, quote, undeniable that the spatiotemporal realm cannot be affected by that which is outside the spatiotemporal realm. Okay, but what justifies this claim? Why? Why can't it? Well, when I hear this, I mean, coming from philosophy of mind, Benacerraf's comment, and this is what when I was a graduate student and heard Benacerraf speak on this is the idea that came to me. Well, his comment about the causal impasse between our space-time worms and abstracta calls to mind the famed causal impasse Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia identifies in her criticisms of Descartes' mind-body dualism. So in the 17th century, causation was thought to occur only on contact. The mechanical clock was a sort of archetype of causation. One thing pushes another. And Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia wrote to Descartes saying she doesn't understand how, as he thought there was causation between mind and body, how something that he says is essentially the mind, not extended in space, could causally affect something that is essentially extended in space. So that seemed to be a large problem, inspiring philosophers to take up all sorts of unusual, I guess, positions like Leibniz's type of divine harmony, things. So positions like that, where there is no causal interaction between mind and body. Okay, however, today we don't understand causation as an exclusively mechanical affair. Since Newton's theory of gravity, we don't require that causation must occur only on contact. Of course, Newton's theory has been superseded, but we haven't returned to this idea of mechanical causation. Now, that said, abstracta are in some sense even less spatial than Cartesian minds. The Cartesian mind is thought to occur in time, but not in space. Also, it's not clear how to understand this idea of not extended, because perhaps the Cartesian mind occurs in space, but it's just not extended in space. Okay, so there might be some differences there. Still, once the 17th century conception of causation as requiring here, contact is jettisoned, one is left wondering just what it is about abstracta that makes them causally effete. Okay, so we're leaving this contact mechanics view. And what is it? Well, and one is especially left wondering this. I think, given that, you look at physics, and this is just highly speculative, and my take on it also just very impressionistic. But physicists do speculate about the way in which space-time emerges from something non-spatiotemporal. Okay, is emergence a type of causation? That can be debated too. I mean, some people think causation is not only can be that a cause and effect are contemporaneous, but some have argued that it always is. So I mean, that's, but okay, so you have John Archibald Wheeler, famously known for his motto, "It from bit." He talks about space-time emerging from free geometry. Edward Witten says he tends to assume that space-time and everything in it are in some sense emergent. I mean, whether the idea here is we're getting something spatiotemporal from something entirely non-spatiotemporal or just two-dimensional, it's not clear. Okay, but I found this idea interesting. Brian Swingle claims that, quote, space-time and gravity must ultimately emerge from something else, hypothesizing that when two entangled particles seem to causally affect each other instantaneously, even when they're separated by vast distances, it is not the case that information from one is traveling faster than the speed of light to reach the other, but that in such communication, that such communication occurs outside of space-time. Okay, well, it's just a sort of speculation. But it seems to me if this speculation is correct, then some non-spatiotemporal communication, something that's going on, this faster than the speed of light, non-spatiotemporal communication is causally affected. It would be natural to say that it's causally affecting the position, momentum, spin, polarization of spatiotemporal entangled particles. Okay, so this is just a sort of warming up or sort of pressing on the intuition that it's a priori impossible for there to be causation between spatiotemporal and non-spatiotemporal. I don't think it's definitive because it's very speculative, but I think it's worth bringing up. I welcome feedback on this. I'm in a revise and resubmit state right now, and I had all this actually in a footnote because I thought, well, gee, it's so speculative, and I'm I'm not so comfortable with understanding what's going on, but one of the reviewers said that's important. So one of the referees. Okay, so, and I do think it makes a point. It gets us warmed up a little bit. Okay, so, but what is this? How should we, if there is spatiotemporal, non-spatiotemporal causation, how might one understand it? Well, there's a lot of contemporary philosophy. We're no longer in the 17th century where there's one theory that's widely accepted, many different views. One common one is counterfactual causation. And maybe, well, let's look. Okay, I'm jumping ahead. Let's see, because of the title. But first, okay, so can there be non-spatiotemporal counterfactual? Can there be spatiotemporal, non-spatiotemporal causation? Well, one thing to ask about is, what are causal relata? What types of things does causation relate? Well, David Lewis, 1973 Lewis, holds that causation relates exclusively spatiotemporal events. So that would be a problem, of course, then, if that's true. But other accounts, including a later Lewis, of causal relata, well, I don't know if the later one is consistent with, but it's not the same as, but other accounts of causal relata are consistent with the existence of non-spatiotemporal causal relata. And here I just have lots of examples. So else, else. Causal relata, he says, are types. He holds are types, which he understands as abstract entities that are not necessarily instantiated in spatiotemporal processes. For example, smoking, he says, would still cause cancer even if everyone who smokes were to die before getting cancer. Okay. Bennett maintains that causal relata are facts, where facts are understood as true propositions, which for Bennett are abstract entities. Goldman also, in his causal theory of knowledge, thinks of the causal relata as facts. Although he doesn't go, I don't think he goes into exactly how he understands facts, but if he understands them as abstract. Okay, so there's many other accounts, and some of them are presented in terms of causation in spatiotemporal realm, but at least they reject the idea that causal relata must be spatiotemporal extended events. Let's see. I have people in the waiting room. Sorry. Can someone else enter them? Let them in?
Sure, we're taking care of that.
Yeah, there's people in the waiting room. I'm just getting a notice. Okay, 3 people in there. Okay. So, okay, other accounts.